I am your host, Nicole Will, and we're so happy you're here as we navigate the world with your aging loved one. We are here to come alongside older adults, family members, and the senior living community as we explore the world of aging and elder care with helpful resources, informative interviews, and approachable conversation. We get to do this together, so join us on our journey, and this is the willGather podcast. How do we promote independence, maximize safety, and improve quality of life for our older adults and caregivers? My guests today are two individuals who are dedicated to improving the lives of seniors and those who care for him. Benjamin Surmi is a social gerontologist and director of education and culture at Koelsch Communities. Lindsay DeLong is the founder of EquipMeOT and EOT Wellness. She is an occupational therapist of 10 years focusing on adult populations and home health. EquipMeOT is a content creation platform and product development company focusing on modifications and adaptations for maximizing safety and quality of life through the lifespan. Together, they have a passion for sharing information for older adults and those family caregivers. Today, we explore tips and tools to help seniors and caregivers navigate daily life with ease and comfort. We talk about some of the common mobility challenges faced by older adults and how we overcome them. What are some practical tips for family caregivers to ensure the safety of our loved ones living at home? And how, as families, we balance the need for wanting independence for our loved one while ensuring their safety and providing support. How we can effectively communicate these strategies when discussing some sensitive issues and looking at risk of falls. How senior living can play a role in providing resource and supporting older adults and families in the community. They also share some strategies for preventing caregiver burnout when we care for loved ones with mobility challenges. My guests today are making a positive impact in the lives of many, many people. I'm so happy they're here. You don't want to miss this interview. Here is my interview with Benjamin Surmi and Lindsay DeLong. So in a world, our aging population is growing rapidly. It's crucial that we have advocates who are dedicated to improving the lives of our seniors and those that care for him. And my two guests today are doing just that. They're dedicated to their work. I'm so happy to introduce to you Lindsay DeLong and Benjamin Surmi. Welcome. Thank you both for joining me today.
Hey, Nicole.
Hello, this is going to be so good. So, when I learned more about both of your backgrounds, I was excited that you were teaming up together because it's so cool that you've merged, the two worlds, and that senior living is stepping into that education role and wanting to reach out to families and older adults. That is my heart. I love bringing those worlds together. So I'm really excited about this conversation and giving families tips and tools as they navigate their daily life with ease and comfort. So first, I want to hear more about you guys and your background a little bit so our listeners know, who are we hearing from? What's their story? So Benjamin, I'll have you start us off with that.
Sure. Well, so I think I'll tell that story by explaining how I met Lindsay. So I'm a social gerontologist, master's degree in the study of aging, and have worked in senior centers and in, working with the indigent poor who are older people, worked as caregivers, worked as activity directors, ran memory care communities. So done a lot in that space. I felt, like I understood and had a lot of compassion for people as they're aging and what they're going through. But then I broke my leg while rollerblading last year.
Oh my goodness.
And all of a sudden I realized that, I knew how hard it was to be disabled, but all of a sudden I was disabled.
Yeah.
And the world changed for me. I couldn't get in the shower on my own anymore.
Wow.
I needed someone to help me get in and out of the shower. I couldn't sit down on the toilet anymore and get up, right? I couldn't get in and out of my house. I couldn't go outside for a walk or sit outside in the sun. I was stuck in my room all day unless someone helped. I couldn't carry a cup of coffee, couldn't carry a cup of tea, couldn't get a bowl of cereal and get it from the refrigerator to the counter to all these basic things I took for granted.
Yeah.
I realized I couldn't do. And so, it gave me a lot of lived experience because in school we study these things, right? And I've worked with seniors for years, and I see what people go through, and I see how we need to accommodate their needs to help them as they have dementia or they have diabetes or they have wheelchairs or walkers or whatever the situation is. But now I like got it in a really big way. And so I'm sitting there on my couch going, okay, what am I going to do with my life right now, right? And I see Lindsay's Instagram page, and I'm watching things that she's reviewing, and like she's the only person I've ever seen on the planet who like really reviews adaptive equipment.
Yeah.
And I end up finding some things that I needed. For instance, one thing she reviewed was these hands-free crutches that let me actually help my wife cook dinner and help me carry things from one place to the next, and completely changed our family's life by being able to have that tool available to us. My own surgeon didn't even know it existed when I showed it to him. He's like, I've never seen that before, right? So that's how I met Lindsay, was her changing my life. And apparently she had broken her leg just a few months before me.
Oh, no.
So we were both kind of commiserating.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my story.
Oh my goodness, Lindsay's, you're saving the day, huh?
So one hands-free crutch at a time. Yeah, one broken foot at a time. Yeah, we broke our bones very close together, which makes us, we're kindred spirits apparently in fractures.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, I'm an occupational therapist by trade. I have a similar background, and I've worked in adult care my entire career. I'm 10 years in to this career. I spent most of it in a combination of inpatient rehab, so working right out of people being discharged from their acute care hospital into an inpatient rehab setting. So, and I primarily focused on multiple trauma. So I was dealing with clients who were in motorcycle accidents, car accidents, where we were seeing not just one fracture, but sometimes a dozen fractures, and having to really problem solve and negotiate how they were going to engage with life. But I also worked with individuals who were recovering from strokes, brain injuries, falls, thousands of falls I have seen recovered over the years. So I was really seeing worst case scenarios for a decade. And during that time, I transitioned to home health, where I was seeing it outside of the hospital setting. So I was really getting to see that functional minutia that we see in a home, whether that is a person's house or an apartment or an assisted living facility. I worked in all of those types of arenas, and I worked in those spaces with, my heart was really always in adaptation and modification, because I knew it was the fastest way to impact quality of life in those moments of struggle. I'm not somebody who pushes equipment. I don't always recommend equipment, but in certain situations, having that right tool to fit that situation, like Benjamin's talking about, can be absolutely altering in that moment, because we are under so much emotional stress when we're injured or recovering, or we have a disability that's been diagnosed recently, or we've had a downturn in our health. And all of those things can kind of compile to be very hopeless, right? You feel this real intense hopelessness and that quality of life. So I loved being able to impact quickly by implementing a simple, hopefully low cost, that's not always an option, but simple, easy to implement change. And that's really where my heart is. And then I started the online resource when the pandemic hit, and the pandemic kind of transitioned how we were implementing care. And as a home health care provider, I was realizing that we were paring back so much of the care we provided. And I wanted to make sure that people were given what they needed. And oftentimes I was hearing things like, boy, I wish I had had this information 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 10 years ago. I'm like, well, if we put it online, we put it on YouTube, we put it on Instagram, it'll just exist in a library format, and we can share those links forever. And I update things as information becomes new and equipment changes and recommendations change, so it's a fluid experience to be able to do that. But I don't have to wait for insurance to give me approval. I don't have to wait for something bad to happen to see you. I can just be online and exist in a space that's completely open, much like a podcast would be. This information exists to prepare and to kind of awaken the thoughts of people so that they can be prepared for these moments, or if they're in that moment, they can have some hope. Yeah. And that's what EquipMeOT has kind of turned into, very much serendipitously, through the pandemic. There's silver linings. And then I established EOT Wellness, which is my product brand, which was born out of necessity of realizing even those big players in the market aren't always solving all the problems. So I was like, why not? So I threw my hat in the ring, and now we're creating some products that are going to hopefully be able to continue to solve those problems we see out in the community. So it's a real pleasure. And, meeting people like Benjamin and like yourself, just to be able to reach out even to more and more people to hopefully help them is the dream. That's why I do it.
I'm so glad both of you are here, and it's the power of collaboration, right? When we come together and we build that community, and it is the collective, right? It's so true. And I remember I saw something, one of your products that I think you created on Instagram, and I commented, and I was really excited about that. And when, you know how much work goes into creation, it's having the idea, it's seeing it through, it's all of that. How did you guys also decide to then team up together? I know, Benjamin, you reached out because you had your surgery, but the thought of going one step further and saying, hey, as a senior living company, we want to actually educate the greater population. How did that come to be?
Yeah, we work with thousands of older people who live in our communities across the United States, and then all of their family members. And then we're often working with people years before they ever need to move into one of our communities. And we're educating them, and we're helping them for sometimes years before they ever move into one of our assisted living, independent living, or memory care communities. And then we have thousands of professionals working in our communities, right? And many of these folks didn't get to go to OT school. They didn't get to go to nursing school. They came to this field because they had a heart to care. They loved older people, wanted to make a difference. Maybe they took a CNA class for 4 weeks or 8 weeks in their state, if their state required it. But a lot of people don't have the background and the education to be able to advise families and say, hey, you know what? Your life would be transformed if you used this tool. A lot of them don't have that information. And so as a gerontologist, I believe that one of the biggest roles professionals in senior living can play is to be that bridge between all of the academic research that has proven great tools and great resources, and the layperson who has no idea there's even a world that they could tap into.
Yeah.
And so that's really where it was all born from, was that desire to help get the information to families when they need it.
And for me, that's so valuable, because as I work in a very isolated, I was out in the community for years and years and years. And then when I started this process, I started working from home by myself, and I require, for me to be able to make sure that the content I'm making and that the information I'm bringing is most pertinent to those who need it. I have to have that outside interaction with those who are right on the front lines or close to it. And that helps me to understand how to best serve the community. Because if I'm just, pulling ideas out of a hat, I'll continue to make content, but it's not going to meet the needs of the current individuals. A great example of this is post-COVID. We see a lot of newly disabled long COVID sufferers. Well, I never worked during a post-COVID. I was all during COVID when I left. So I am taking in so much great information and feedback from individuals who are working in the community to know, okay, these are the issues we're seeing. How do my knowledge of equipment and my knowledge of adaptation and modification, what would I recommend in that situation? Right. So it becomes almost simulated for me because I'm not out seeing them. So it's so important that I stay rooted and connected to the communities that are serving. I'm abundantly grateful that Benjamin reached out, because that has, resulted in more content that I can share that I know is rooted in the educational needs of all of those great people who are resources for the individuals in the community.
I was super excited to see it in the sense of Benjamin, right, coming from the senior living world, and now I'm in the family caregiver space, given my background. I felt like senior living has to do a better job, and you are excluded from that because you're doing it. But do you find, and maybe this is a whole nother podcast, that that senior living as a whole isn't stepping maybe into that education role as they could be? I was preparing for a talk that I'm giving actually next week, and when I asked where do families find resources, senior living was not a part of that conversation at all. And it's sad because I think, oh my gosh, that's kind of the message I was trying to get out there, is that, but they should be. They should be that number one source of hope and education as they're working with older adults every day. And who better than to bring that message to families? So thank you. I know I've said it already, but thank you for doing that for your company. It's a big deal.
Thank you.
So we're going to dive in. How do you see different mobility challenges play out in the lives of our older adults? What are some of those common challenges? How do we overcome that? Where are you seeing that landscape right now?
Mobility is so broad, and I love that this came up with an OT, because sometimes it's like this is where we get into the arguing matches with other professionals. And I have to say that OT, PT, speech therapy, all of us allied health professionals, nursing, we all collaborate on these types of issues. So I want to make sure to make that clear that I don't own the entirety of mobility challenges. But what I do see is how functional mobility impacts things like fall risk, things like participation in chosen or necessary activities. So when it comes to the significant changes in mobility over time, it's really interesting, because my own grandmother recently moved into an assisted living facility, and prior to her moving, her mobility challenges were visible. She has tremors. She uses a mobility aid, a four-wheeled walker. And in her home, because the demands were higher, she didn't have anyone helping her. She was moving more. And she was moving. And then when she moved into her assisted living, she had more things brought to her, more things done for her. Her room is cleaned for her. Her bed is made for her. You know, the meals could be brought to her. Initially, we saw an initial decline in her functional mobility. And I was like, oh boy, this is concerning. However, I had known enough to kind of prepare for that. And we implemented some more like, okay, grandma, you're not doing quite as much in the home. We just had to bring it to her attention. She's cognitively intact enough that we were able to have that meaningful conversation, get her moving a little bit more through kind of fun activities that she was now able to reserve some energy for. So there was just, all I needed was education in that scenario. That's super, super common, that we see individuals actually show a slight decline in mobility when they transition to a new living environment. And that's for many reasons, as the example I shared, but also fear. There's a lot of fear of falling in an unfamiliar environment if we've got low vision, or just unfamiliarity with the spaces. Sometimes flooring can be the big difference maker. We've all of a sudden got this new texture or new visual tile or whatever it might be. All of a sudden we see this mobility decline, and somebody who was 50% of the time in a wheelchair is now 100% of the time in a wheelchair because they don't trust themselves to ambulate. And it's so vital that those conversations are had of like, a change in mobility status doesn't have to be permanent. It doesn't have to be the new normal. It can be something that's a starting point that we work from. And knowing that during that transitional phase into a long-term, or, you know, if you've committed to an assisted living facility long-term, knowing that that's likely the case is super important up front. So I always want to kind of preface it with that, because I've seen that play out so many times. And I don't know that we always have a clear understanding, especially as caregivers. We're just like, what is going on? Very common. We see it all the time. And a lot of times it's just a matter of understanding where that is coming from and then going from there, because nothing has to be permanent. We can make those adjustments. We can change the mobility type. We can make visual acuity changes to the space so it's easier to navigate. We can add lighting. We can do these things that can have an impact on that functional mobility right off the bat.
I like that you mentioned that hope, that there is the possibility for change and that we don't have to be stuck in that place, because I think sometimes we see that change and then we go, oh, okay, we're here now, and we don't forge through, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good point. And I think that, you know, the benefit of, let's say, a senior living environment is socialization, being able to go on trips with people, all of those things. And so what Lindsay said about reserving energy by having the tools in place so that that person has more energy to go to a yoga class, to go to a swim fit class, to go to a trip downtown, to go antiquing and have lunch, right? Like, that is huge. And so that's one of the benefits of learning from someone like Lindsay what kind of tools mom might need so that her life and her new environment, she's actually got energy to do things that are awesome rather than spending her whole day worrying about how am I going to get to the bathroom
Yeah.
and like exhausted from that.
That is such a vital piece of this, because if you can flip the mindset, because so often we look at transitioning to care being a downgrade in quality of life, because it's just like ingrained in us. It's kind of like implementing a new piece of adaptive equipment. We run into this all the time. It's like we're up against a brick wall when we say, hey, have you considered using a shower chair? And they look at us like, how dare you? I'm not that kind of old.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this doesn't have anything to do with me telling you that you're now incapable of standing in the shower. However, if we put this in place, we reduce your fall risk, we give you a little bit of gas left in the tank after you've taken your shower, instead of you being done for the day after a shower. Now you have the energy to go and have a nice meal with your family, or be able to participate in bingo tonight, when normally on a shower day, you're toast and that's all you got in the tank. So just kind of addressing that mindset change of like, we're trying to conserve energy, we're trying to reduce risk of injury, we're trying to reduce pain, because so many people live in pain, live in fear, and they don't necessarily have that open mind of like, this can change, this can get better. And I find that to be something that is a long process. It doesn't happen quickly. It doesn't happen in a single visit. It usually happens over time with trust building. And you know, my grandma's my favorite example, because she's beautiful, and she just got home from the hospital like yesterday.
Oh, wow.
And so I was up visiting her yesterday, and the joy that she had just knowing that she could get back to those really fun things. The fun is what got that woman out of the hospital. The doctor wasn't sure she was going to make it. And she goes, I gotta go. I'm having too much fun. And I think that speaks volumes for the value of a quality assisted living space. She was living independently prior, but she was miserable, and she was using every ounce of energy just to survive.
Yeah.
And now she can use it to make bunny socks with her grandkids. And that's what we did yesterday. We made little bunny thing, and she had all the energy in the world for it, because she didn't have to worry about making her meal or cleaning her bathroom.
Yeah.
You know, it's an exchange, and it's a beautiful exchange when you see it happen in real time.
Yeah. And when you can explain it like that and educate people on that, the mindset's huge. It shifts how we do everything. Save that energy for all the fun stuff. Yeah.
It's quality of life, you know, and I'm a huge proponent. I know Benjamin is as well. When you've worked in gerontology, when you've worked in older adult care, and I've worked in end of life care across the entire lifespan. I worked in palliative and I worked in oncology for several years. And one of the things I learned from that time was those years are so precious and when you kind of are holding on to like what's left, and you strip away all the extra, and you can really focus on what we bring the most value to as an occupational therapist, that's what I love. If I can, sure, I can issue you the things for showering. I can issue you a tool to make dressing easier, and I'm passionate about that. But boy, if I can give you a tool to make you able to engage with a family meal, or, for my grandma who has tremors, I brought her this really cool writing aid that allowed her to sign her own cards, because it drove her crazy with her tremors that she couldn't add her signature to the card. My mom had to sign for her. She has beautiful, like calligraphy style writing. So I brought her a tool, and yesterday she practiced it. She signed 2 birthday cards before we left that were getting sent off to family members. So those little impactful, valuable things that a simple tool can change, that's what gets me up every day. That's what gets me up in the morning.
So meaningful.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm thinking right now about one key principle that families may not understand, that would be good to talk about briefly. So you asked about mobility challenges. What can we do about them? I think many families think of senior living as a place that if they bring mom there's all these medical professionals that are going to look at the situation and come up with a plan that will really help mom live as independently as possible. I think what a lot of families don't realize is that senior living, assisted living, independent memory care, even in nursing homes, even the old-fashioned nursing home, they're really like little apartments or big apartments with amenities. They're not medical environments necessarily, with consultants who are going to be looking at what is the best possible set of tools that will help this person live well. And so even if you choose a really educated workforce, let's say a senior living company that has lots of professionals who work at the community, the structure is just different. Like there's not a mechanism for, okay, we do a case study on every resident and come up with all these plans, right? So it's really important that families see themselves in that advocacy role of, okay, my mom just got a wheelchair from their doctor. It is the most basic wheelchair that the doctor just said, hey, go to the, supply store and get. But if they just take half an hour to check out Lindsay's channel and research the options that Lindsay has available, it literally could transform that older person's next 10 years of their life. Like they may be able to do things they never could do before. So I'm a big fan of families seeing themselves in that role of, we're the ones that are going to be choosing what tools. No one else will choose what tools mom will use. We're going to be the ones to do that. And so we need to know what's out there so that we can be better advice. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
Completely. And I'm glad you brought that up, because my message to families has also been like, you have agency and you can share with what you feel is valuable information because you're part of the care team, and that family caregiving continues as your loved one moves into communities. You're still a big part of that. And so I love your perspective. Thank you for bringing that up. It's so true. Yeah.
And it's such an important delineation too, because as a healthcare provider, our lens is very different than the caregivers who are working within the facility. So as an occupational therapist, I was brought in from a home health team. I was completely disconnected for the most part from the staff, though I learned very, very quickly, if you want anything to get done, you need to know exactly which staff members to talk to. You need to know the nurses. You need to know anybody and everybody in the care team that exists within that environment, because it's different across many of the different programs and things like that. And so we would come in as outsiders. We are outsiders. And so the family members are gold to us, because a lot of times they're going to be able to give me such valuable feedback. So if you're ever in the situation where you have a healthcare provider given to you and you have the opportunity to take advantage of that relationship, having some information up front, so having spent a little time reviewing my content or looking over some similar content prior to working with a healthcare provider, the value you get out of that very brief time, because we all know it's not enough time. Us healthcare providers know more than anybody that we just don't have enough time to work with your loved ones. But if you've prepared a little bit and you're like, kind of enough to be dangerous in that conversation, and I say that very tongue in cheek, enough to be, really engaged, the value is multiplied tenfold. I can't tell you how wonderful it would be whenever I'd walk into a room and there was a caregiver present who was engaged in what they wanted, and there was a collaboration going on there. Oh, chef's kiss. Yeah. That was a beautiful moment.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
Yeah.
I think families balance wanting their loved one to be really safe and supported while also respecting their independence. How do you navigate that with your people that you work with, or advice that you would give families on how do we delicately do that? We want to respect the independence and the lives lived while making sure mom and dad are safe.
I think that's one of the things it's actually beautiful about what Lindsay's doing, right? Because Lindsay is bringing something that's not sexy and not fun to talk about and making it fun, right? And that's a huge part of the challenge that families face, right? It's about style, it's about lifestyle, it's about fun, it's about fashion. And people love to talk about that. They don't want to talk about, all right, Dad, you need to use this special walker, Dad, because the doctor said you need to use this walker, right? So if you have someone like Lindsay who's making fun TikToks and stuff and taking it out of that awful world of let's not mention this to hey, everybody should use this. Like anybody might need this any point in their life.
Yeah.
All of a sudden it takes some of the stigma away. So that's my starting point for you, Lindsay.
No, you're right. It's anyone at any age. I was looking at some of those and I'm like, I want to use them. I want to use those. Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, I'm so glad you got that from what I've been doing, because one of the things that I did very kind of unintentionally, because I'm a goober and I find that I take everything pretty lightly, and it's how I survived in really tough spaces over the years in healthcare, because the job is really hard and it can be really, really sad sometimes. And one of the things that I learned very early on from healthcare providers who I love those in my life. And I learned that bringing things to people's attention in a way that doesn't scare them, that doesn't make people feel immediately intimidated. I'm never going to throw a bunch of jargon at you. I'm never going to throw a bunch of, if I'm going to bring something to you that's sensitive, I'm going to meet you where you are when I bring it to you. And so what I do with my content is I always try to like give you the opportunity to process what I'm showing you, and however that means you're going to process it. I leave it pretty open-ended. I let you experience it very much in your own way. And I do that professionally in person as well. I think when you're presenting something that so often reflects a negative moment in your life, if you're issuing a toileting aid to somebody, something in their life is not going great. And that's a really tough conversation to have if you come at it from I'm so sorry. You must feel so terrible that this is happening to you. You can't do that. No. You just like, here's the options. They're endless. Look at how many risers there are. I can offer you 200 different riser solutions, some of which disappear into your bathroom, others of which are a little bulkier, but they're cheap. What's your priority? What do you like? And I think if you present it in a way that feels like any other conversation, my dad always jokes that the way I present medical equipment is the way that, like, he worked in construction for years. He's like, you present medical equipment like somebody might present beautiful tile. Yeah. You're like, look at this one. This one has shiny waves in it. This one has a lovely glass out. He's like, if you can present things in a way that's practical, easy to understand, but also gives people options and makes them part of that conversation, you can take a lot of the barrier down. The other thing is you can't force it. Absolutely not. You cannot force it. You can give every bit of research and information out there, and there are still going to be a large handful of people who will continue to decline that option. You have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
My own grandmother won't use oxygen. She needs oxygen, but she's not going to do it because it hurts her nose. And she has yet to find a solution that she likes. And she's okay with being a little loopy sometimes because her oxygen dips. That's just a decision she's made. And my mother is livid about it, but I keep reminding her that she has the autonomy to make those medical choices for herself. You would want that same freedom as well.
Right.
It's a tough thing to do. It's a tough, little balance to make because we make medical decisions sometimes that are really vital. And we say things like, you're going to use a walker because if you don't use a walker, you will fall. And sometimes you have to present it that way. I love when I have former military are fabulous because they're either going to give you all of the crap and say, no way, never, I am so like tough as nails, I'll never do it. Or they follow everything to a T. You never know what you're going to get. It's a real spicy stuff. And so meeting people where they are and understanding that you cannot change what you cannot change.
Yeah.
But you can always provide options. And you can always re-provide options. Sometimes they have to hit a point. You got to hit that wall and be like, I'm sick and tired of not being able to do this task myself. And then they're willing to listen. So sometimes it's timing. Sometimes it's the style, and I've loved what I've been able to do for the last 3 years because I've been able to deep dive into what equipment is available, which is not typical of a healthcare provider. We don't have time for that. We're going to show you the basics. Get in, get out, move on to the next one. That's how our system is set up. But I have time. I have resources. So come find me. I'll get the information to you fast. That's what I always tell healthcare providers or caregivers who are just like, I don't have time to look at 200 different toilet seat options. I'm like, well, I did. So come talk to me. Save you the time and the headache.
And that is what we need is we are stretched for time.
Yeah.
And you've done all of that deep dive. So yeah, absolutely. We will have to go and learn more. Okay, I loved the toilet example, how you approached it from that fun way and like all the different things, all the different options. I think I saw one too where there was like a bidet attached to one. Like
yesterday.
Okay, yeah.
You've been following close.
I have, yeah. I was like, I like that idea too. So adding things like that could even add to the experience. But along with that, what are some other assistive devices that families could approach in a fun way? Like, could you give them some ideas of what to say about, okay, whether it's using a walker or I don't know, what are some other common tools that you help people find?
Some of the really great products on the market that I think can impact people and they don't always think about them are things for dressing. When it comes to clothing, and I am thrilled to report that we have seen a huge boom in adaptive clothing. Things like magnetic closures, magnetic zipper starters. So things where the zipper starts itself with a magnet and then it just whoop real easily. We've seen reverse closure shirts, wheelchair cuts on clothing, so that not only are we able to adapt the physical needs or cognitive needs of the individual we're caring for, but we can do it with some style. Like Benjamin pointed out, adaptive clothing has come so far. In just the last few years, we've seen this huge boom in it. In fact, I'm wearing, your listeners won't be able to see this, but I'm wearing a shirt that has Braille printed on it.
Oh, so cool.
By a beautiful company that specializes in making Braille printed clothing, and they make tags and things like that, so you can have your keys with a Braille thing. So there's these companies out there that are incredibly passionate, incredibly niche about creating adaptive attire, shoes. We're seeing Kizik is a brand that blew up on the scene a few years ago, where they created a slip-on shoe that looks like a regular tennis shoe. I own them. They are literally the only shoe I wear because they're so simple to use. But for every client, I gave them to my grandmother because she couldn't bend over to put her shoes on safely without losing breath and struggling. And now she can slide into these classy little teal, tennis shoes and look like a little bopper. She's so cute. And, these are the types of companies that are like emerging onto the scene that are making that tough conversation of, hey, you got to start wearing Velcro shoes. Like you're going to be wearing, because we can't help you every day get your shoes on, or you're going to have to use these 3 tools. Now you don't have to, because product companies are coming out with these solutions. And I think that's a huge wave of change coming in the disability community, and it impacts across the age span. But for caregivers out there, don't be afraid to look at what the options are, because if something's hard, there's usually a solution. It's just a matter of finding it. And that's what I try to do, is kind of aggregate those solutions that are out there. But clothing is a huge one that you can really make a massive difference in somebody's day-to-day life with.
Yeah, thank you.
I think a couple fun ones that I've seen that Lindsay bring up are one, a really cool little deal where you just put this little topper onto your milk bottle, your soda bottle, your juice bottle. You put it in the fridge. Someone who's a little weak can still open the refrigerator, press the little pump, and it puts the drink into their cup without them having to pull the big jug of milk out, spill it on the counter, all that stuff. Something as simple as that. Like when I was, I couldn't walk, right? It's very hard to carry a big gallon of milk to the counter. Things like that. You never know how something so small can make that difference in someone's quality of life and take that stress level away, because they're thinking about it for the hour before they need it. They're thinking, okay, how am I going to do that? Right now, that just goes away for them.
Yeah. Electronics. There are some really fun, you pointed out, so the electric beverage dispenser, which as a mom of 2 young girls who like to be able to do it themselves all the time, I'm telling you, it's across the age span that particular product has value. I also love Kitchen Mama has a wonderful one-touch can opener. You just set that thing on, push one button, it opens the cans, and it leaves it without the sharp edge. It cuts the entire top off, so it's easy to remove. You've taken away that risk of injury, as well as made a task that can be really cumbersome of cranking a can open. Now it's just push a button, pop it off. I use it nearly daily in my life. Another one in the kitchen that I love is the chopping devices. They kind of look like a mandolin, but they're a chopper that you just set your pre-cut into large chunks, and then perfect uniform cubes of onions, and I use it for all of my soup preparations. But these little things in the kitchen, that's another super fun space to find equipment in, can maintain some independence, can maintain some really chosen activities. I mean, so many people, when they give up cooking, it's almost like it's like giving up driving, right? It's a really devastating moment. And cooking's one we can bring back. Cooking's one that I have found there's always a way. I've cooked with C2 spinal cord injury survivors. So, and all they had was the ability to move their eyes. There is a way. And so giving up those tasks, isn't always inevitable. I always say that, like, you don't have to. If you want to do it, there's usually something we can do to get that back. So sometimes that's the best way in to introducing adaptive equipment to somebody who's really reluctant. I'm just thinking as we go here, because if you can show them something fun, start there and be like, hey, did you know this exists for the kitchen? Now you can go back to, making your own. I know you have this beautiful recipe for Easter. Let's make sure we can, make it with you. And then say, there's also adaptive equipment that has the same value that we could use in the bathroom. It kind of opens that conversation up, but starts it in a more fun and palatable place.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I love that. There's a way. There's always a way. And you've narrowed down what some of those options are. How about fall risk? So I know falling in our home it's how my grandma actually, we had to make that move to senior living community. Her health changed after that fall. Are there any major points of focus on how we can look at that, preventing that?
I always say fall prevention I could spend a year just sharing fall prevention recommendations. The biggest thing with fall prevention is understanding the person, the environment, and the activity. So falls don't happen in a vacuum. It's not like falls are happening because there's rugs. A lot of times we'll throw out these very standard, take away all the rugs, use your walker and you won't fall. The reality is falls are a multifaceted issue and they require an understanding of the person, the environment, and the activity. Sometimes that can be done with really good observation. So as a caregiver to somebody, watching your loved one move about throughout their environment during the day, doing various tasks, and taking note of when you see iffy movement. You see things that are like, oh, when they go into the bathroom, their walker doesn't fit. So they have to, they kind of throw their walker aside and they do this kind of side shuffle crab scuttle into the bathroom to get to the toilet. And then that turn to get onto the toilet is problematic. And so I like to point that out as a way that you can be your own loved one's advocate, is identifying places and times where you're seeing movements and behaviors that kind of shoot up a red flag. Starting there, being able to communicate that with a professional, a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, even your primary care physician, will help to guide the next phases of the process, which are to make targeted, appropriate for the individual, any of their diagnoses, recommendations. There isn't a one size fits all approach. And if they're selling you one, don't buy it. Because it is a very individual, very targeted practice. There are absolutely, there's wonderful resources online that are fall prevention checklists. And all you have to do is Google fall prevention checklist, and you'll see some ideas that can give you ideas of what to observe. We see lots of falls in the bathroom. So making sure that your loved one, if they're very private and they don't let you in, having them do what I like to call a dry run. I don't want to see you go to the bathroom, Mom. I appreciate your privacy, but could you show me what it looks like when you use the bathroom at night, for example? That's where we typically see falls.
That's a great
And then
idea.
you might be able to tease out and identify some barriers that are existing in that space. Those techniques, I think, have the most value versus like a blanket straight statement of get rid of the rugs, make sure Mom's using her walker appropriately, because a lot of times it's more nuanced than that.
Yes, it is. Benjamin, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that one benefit some families might find in certain senior living communities is asking specifically, what are your fall prevention programs that are in place, and really dive into what's there. Two things that I think are important, and so I'm working to implement them across our companies, is I think having on-site occupational and physical therapy is essential, so that families can know that their loved one can literally walk out to their apartment, go to a clinic, meet with an OT and a PT, do it as often as they need to, and insurance will pay for it. Like, I think that's essential. It's so essential in 2023, 100%. And there's now the infrastructure to make that happen. The other thing that we're piloting is a program called S3 Balance. There are these really cool bars that are, it kind of looks like a walker that an 800-pound gorilla could use. And with just 10 minutes a day, 5 days a week, there's been a lot of evidence showing that people stop shuffling. They stop looking down when they're walking. They actually get rid of, maybe if they're using a walker, they're now using a cane, or if they're using a wheelchair, they're able to use a walker. There's some really interesting stuff. So having programs in place that actually strengthen the older person, I think is really important. If someone's living at home, there's just a little bit more on the family to kind of put that together, right? Whether it's an online program or whether it's bringing them to a senior center of some sort regularly, but having those balance exercises is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. An ounce of prevention, as they say, can go a long, long ways. Fall prevention, I know that most of the research has indicated that the best way to prevent a fall is to go to the root cause, which is strength, balance, fear. So much of it is not the environment. There's some environmental changes that can be made to support those things, but you're absolutely right, Benjamin. Having those structures in place and a plan in place to maintain. I know a beautiful program that's being done is PTOT collaborative, but they work with older adults in almost a CrossFit like strength training, where they're offering the opportunity to work with heavy weights because they are finding that things like osteoporosis, things like fracture risks and things like that, arthritis, all of these things are worse when our bodies are not absorbing relatively high loads of effort. And so there's these great programs that are coming out that are really pushing older adults to maintain a physical activity level that's never been really implemented before. And really for the only reason of nobody was researching it enough, but we have research now to indicate that that's super valuable. So I love that. It's a great point because there are options.
Yes. Thank you. And I'm so glad your community offers that fall prevention support. There is more of a conversation I've noticed, and I'm sure, Lindsay, you've seen that too, where the conversation around heavy weights and high protein, and our muscle is our largest organ, and we have to invest in that. If we're not building muscle, we're losing muscle, right? So being able to make sure that happens, even as, at any age. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And we're in a phase now where one of the cool things about being present in a social media space like TikTok or Instagram is I'm reaching folks when they're younger. A lot of times, as my audience tends to skew younger. But what's really beautiful about that is when we have these types of conversations and we're reaching individuals at a younger age, the hope is that by the time they reach older age, or by the time their parents who are, they're able to influence and talk to, we will have a generation of older adults who are more independent, who are less fall prone, who are less at risk for injury from falls because they can sustain a trip or stumble without it resulting in a major catastrophic injury, because we've put in place these new forms, this new understanding, and knowing that stuff's always changing. What worked 15 years ago, we know now so much more than we did. So it's really, really good to get multiple perspectives, to talk to a bunch of different professionals and do your homework, because you might find something that you had no idea existed that can be absolutely life altering, not only for your loved one, but for you yourself. Taking care of yourself as the caregiver is hugely important.
It is, which leads me to my next thought and question is, how do we overcome some of that? We call that term caregiver burnout, where we're going through a lot physically, mentally, emotionally when we care for our older adults that have mobility challenges and health issues. Great point to that. How do we alleviate some of that?
I think, first of all, a lot of what Lindsay brings to the world is stuff that even a family caregiver can use for themselves, right? There's all kinds of things that older person, because many times these family caregivers are 45 years old, 50 years old, 60-year-olds. There's things that can make their life easier, right? Just for themselves, just for them getting dressed, them cooking, them driving places, them doing life, right? But then also, many of these tools, if we're putting them in place, they actually reduce my caregiver load, right? And so for a caregiver to be thinking about some of these tools to have available, to have in place, can actually help them be able to provide the care with less burden on their body, or less psychological burden because they're, having to handle things that they may not have to handle otherwise. So I'll let Lindsay speak to that in particular. Going to kind of the other side of the equation, I think, caregiver burnout support groups are critical. Finding a support group in your area of people who are going through the same thing can be absolutely one of the most important things for helping yourself cope. And it sounds silly and it's, I don't need a support group, but the community that's built in support groups and the real tested information, because you can listen to experts all day, but it's the person who's actually doing it who will give you some of the most important information. And so going to those support groups is key. And then taking advantage of respite programs in your area. Senior living, senior centers, etc., often have respite programs where the older person can go have lunch, have some time with some friends. You can go and get away, go take a walk, go take a hike, go out with some of your own friends, get a nap. Taking advantage of those things can make the difference for somebody.
Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. That's such a great point. Yeah, one of the things that I work with caregivers a lot on is being kind to themselves and recognizing that you cannot be everything for everybody. It's interesting because there's a mirroring in the conversation between caregivers for older adults and parents. And as a parent myself, I've had a lot of these moments where I've been burned out and I've realized that I need to ask for help and advocate for myself. And that's really hard because it feels like I'm acknowledging a weakness, something that I couldn't handle. And the reality was I knew that my body and my mind were not right to be able to do the job I needed to do for my kids. It's the exact same thing for caregivers. If you aren't doing the things you need to do to keep your body and your mind right, you're not going to be able to show up for your loved one who you do desperately love. And I think that you get burnout and you also get resentment. And when those things start to snowball into this, immense burden of emotion, it can be so difficult. And so you're absolutely right, Benjamin, having those support groups, having those people to lean back on, and also just having the sense that there's probably a solution for this. We just maybe haven't found it yet. Have hope. If I can offer anything, it's hope that there's options, and those options may not work for you, but even if that's the case, maybe we've just started a thought process that could link to an option coming about. The scrub brush that I created, it bends and can be used to both wash your hair as wash your back without having to reach above your shoulders. The reason I created that was because I worked with so many people who couldn't reach their own hair to wash it, or their loved one couldn't do it. And so that task of being able to wash their own hair was being handed off every single time to somebody else. It was a burden on the individual. It was a burden on the caregiver. So a simple tool that didn't exist yet, but because I had heard enough from those people, we decided to make it. And there's companies and there's people like myself all over who just want to know what we can do to help. So reaching out, asking for help, knowing that if the resource doesn't exist, there's people who want to make it exist. Yeah. We really, really do. And being open to being part of that conversation. That's been one of the most beautiful parts of what I've created with EquipMeOT is that I get messages all day long, 7 days a week, from individuals asking questions. And I'm so thrilled that they feel safe to do that, because I know in a caregiving space, whether you yourself are a caregiver or you yourself are living with a disability, asking questions and feeling safe to do that is one of the biggest barriers. So finding people that you feel safe asking and starting there is so helpful. But yeah, caregiver burden, we need to stop. We need to have a day. We've got Mother's Day and we've got Father's Day. It's time to implement Caregiver Day. And just like we need to shower our caregivers with all the love and support, because they are truly, truly holding our country together. Literally, in a lot of ways. Yeah. I don't know what we would do without caregivers. Yes. As a healthcare provider, I love what Benjamin said about you can learn so much from those who are on the front lines. I learned 10% of what I know from textbooks and from research. Right. The other 90% came from boots on the ground, listening to people who are out there solving hard problems. And they were not professionals. They were caregivers. They were individuals living with disabilities. So knowing that those people are out there and want to support each other, you just have to find them. Yeah. Social media is a great place to find people if you're not super comfortable going into a physical space with others. Instagram and Facebook have wonderful communities that you can start there, kind of follow anonymously for a while until you feel comfortable branching out and being part of that community.
We learned so much from people, families, and even professional caregivers, right? I've learned some of my favorite techniques by witnessing the caregivers that that worked with my grandma and that I had the privilege of working with in the community. Benjamin, as senior living communities, how can we do service for our families and older adults of communities that live in it? I know you talked about it a little bit, but what role do you see senior living playing in reaching out to families, reaching out to the community, and how do we do that well?
I think that there are many senior living communities that are trying to do it, but may not have the media presence to be able to really help the families in their city know that they're offering classes, they're offering support groups, they're offering respite, they've got a library of books families can check out many times. And I think a lot of families just have literally no idea that those resources are available at their local senior living community in their city. And families may not even know the terms to look for. They may still be searching nursing home on their Google Maps or Yelp or something like that. And none of these communities even want to be known as a nursing home because they're not. They're a beautiful resort apartment complex with amenities. They're not a nursing home. So part of it is just families not even knowing that these resources exist and thinking, I only need to reach out if my mom has had a fall and I can't take care of her at home anymore. That's the only time I would ever reach out to a senior living, when actually they have like trips that you can go on. They have, games and classes you could take. And then they have all the educational stuff. Now, for senior living, if someone's in senior living watching, if you're literally just selling apartments, please go get another job. Leave our industry, please.
We've evolved.
Your job is to develop a community, to build a community within the city that you're in. And that is your job. Your job is not just to sell apartments. Your job is to build community and build a welcoming space for older people and their families. And to do that, connecting them to the tools and resources that will help older people live well on the next 20 years of their life. So that is your role. So take it, embrace it, or go somewhere else and sell apartments.
So how do you let the public know when you said, families might not even know that it's available? How are you finding that you're able to do that successfully? Is it just over time you build that media presence and that community building relationship, right?
I think every company does it a little differently. I don't think we've necessarily at Koelsch found the right secret sauce yet. We have the benefit of 65 years of reputation in many of our communities. And so that helps, that just that local community knowledge of the people and the places that have been there for so long. And I think, we've also had a philosophy around giving back, and our leaders in our community, their job is not just to run their community. Their job is to be involved in the wider community, whether it's Meals on Wheels, whether it's supporting the local caregiver award ceremony, maybe it's supporting the Alzheimer's Association, maybe it's, giving back, being a part of the wider picture rather than just, oh, hey, everybody needs our one resort, right? That's everybody needs us. Well, there's so many older people. So being a part of the local community, I think, is really, really important. We are working very hard to expand the digital footprint, though, because the 45 to 65-year-olds who are looking for care for their loved ones, they don't call their neighbor and go, hey, where'd you go? They pick up their phone and they Google, right? So we've got to be able to meet people where they're at. Just because I know I don't call my friend and say, hey, what plumber do you use? I go on Google Maps and I read all the reviews. That's how I find my plumber. That's how I'm going to find anything. If I'm from a church, if I for a church, I'm going to go to Google Maps. That's terrible.
I go on Instagram. Terrible. I'm like, what restaurant do I want to go to?
Yes.
That's so true. I love the example of I keep going back to this because the assisted living that my grandmother's part of is part of a large community of assisted living facilities, but they're the smallest one because they're up north, kind of out of the way, tucked in this little area. They have 34 residents. That's it. They have the benefit of being part of a larger organization, so they have that ability to finance and take care of their residents, but they're so connected to the community because it's a small community. They're hosting an Easter egg hunt on Sunday for all the kids in the community, and you bet your bottom that there are going to be 100 kids there because they know about this place. On Halloween, they do a trunk or treat in their driveway, and they open up the doors so that the residents are handing out candy at their doors. And it was just beautiful. And like having that community connection built so much for my mom when she was looking for a place for my grandmother to be. She was so thrilled to know that the community was involved in the care of these elderly individuals who came from the community. And it was just, it was an incredible observation to see it, because I've seen the other side too. I've seen where it's like this, that's the senior apartment place and they're completely isolated and we don't talk about that, you know. And I've been to those communities and it's hard to feel connected to that versus this alternative where you have this community component. And I know it's not always realistic, but seeing it done well is just a pleasure to observe it. So having that be the end goal for senior living spaces is awesome, because I think it really does make a massive difference. And there's a hearkening back to it. I don't think we all reach back for our phone, but when we see community happen, we all we exhale, because it feels really good. I think as humans, we still want it. We just, there's convenient ways to get around not needing it. And so I do think that, you know, giving people that reminder once in a while of like, you need to have community, and having senior living be part of that community rather than just be like its separate entity is so incredible. I will always sing the praises of companies that are doing that.
To your point, when we see it done well, it's that quote of, you know, we remember how people and communities make us feel. I think, who said that? Oh my gosh, Maya Angelou. You know, we won't remember maybe what people say, but we'll remember how they make us feel. And that's so true. When you walk in those communities that do that well, that have that mindset, even just the vibe out into the world, we sense that, right? We can pick up on that. Energy doesn't lie. I always like to say that. So it's so true. How can we connect with you guys? Where can we learn more? I want to direct people, so our listeners, and we'll include all of that in the show notes. But yeah, share what you're up to and where we can learn more. Lindsay, we can start with you.
Sure. So I am an open book. I'm all over the internet, sometimes to my own chagrin, but I am on YouTube under the name EquipMeOT. My YouTube channel is going to provide you long form content. So very detailed, lots of information, lots of technique heavy components. So I've got a lot of information about surgical recoveries, very specific to functional tasks like bathing and dressing and using the toilet, doing laundry, all of these types of tasks really broken down. So that's a very, like, you'll hear me talk and you'll get a lot of information from those videos. And they also share all of the equipment that I use in those videos. I also am on Instagram under EquipMeOT. And TikTok. That's where I share a lot of short form content, where it's really kind of a quick snapshot of like, hey, check this out. And then usually in the stories, if you follow me, I do a lot more breakdown and talk about it with more detail. But both are good resources. I also have an Amazon shop where I share all of the Amazon purchasable items. So if you're looking for like a list of recommended products, I have a shop under Amazon, and I can share that link as well. So that just is stuff that is tried and true that I keep recommending over and over again. And I find Amazon is just the easiest way for people to be able to get it for a really reasonable price, for the most part. So that's why I like to use Amazon. And then you can always email me at lindsay@equipmeot.com, and I'm an open book. So if you've got questions, I try to answer them personally. The business is literally me with a side of me. So it's what you're going to get when you reach out.
So good. And I'm sure people will be thrilled to interact with you. So thank you.
You're wonderful.
Thank you. And Benjamin, where can we learn more about your company and who you work for and what you're up to and what you are doing?
I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. And so if someone just searches my name, Benjamin Surmi on LinkedIn, they'll find me. And you'll kind of see different innovative projects that I'll be involved in. As I've often posting, newspaper articles and stuff related to whatever innovation we're trying to implement or researching. And so that can be a fun way to kind of just get a little window into what's going on in the aging space. So LinkedIn's great. And then for our company, KoelschCommunities.com, you're able to see all the communities around the country and get a little more information. You can take tours of them online, like actually walk through them and see kind of what they look like, see the reminiscing features and memory care and the wellness features and independent living and all that good stuff. So KoelschCommunities.com, and then LinkedIn, also a great spot to connect with me personally.
This has been wonderful. We could talk. I know I'm looking at the time and I have a million other questions, but people can go and find you, connect with you, learn from you. We'll have to have you come back and sometime in the future and talk about some more things, but I've enjoyed it. Thank you for your knowledge, your wisdom, sharing with us. It is incredibly valuable. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having a platform to do it. Because like we had said, that's one of the biggest challenges is finding a way to get this information to those who can use it. So thank you for being here and making this so accessible to your community.
Pleasure. Thank
Great
you.
to be with you both today.
Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.